The information shared in this episode is not intended to serve as a substitute for mental health services and is only intended to provide education and information to you, the listener. Thank you so much for joining the Honeybee Podcast. Today's episode will focus on co-parenting after a divorce, as well as the effects that a divorce can potentially have on a child's overall functioning. This episode was created because of a letter received by a concerned parent signing their name as Distressed Daddy. I invited a very important guest to help with problem solving, but before I introduce her, I would like to share the letter with you. Dear Honeybee, my wife of 13 years and I divorced about a year ago. We have one child together, our daughter, who is 11. My ex-wife and I had marital problems for years, and we did a pretty good job at hiding our differences from our daughter. When we told our kid about our plans to divorce, it goes without saying that she was pretty devastated. Our daughter has historically been a pretty good student, kind to her friends, and very outgoing. Now she is struggling in school, more distant emotionally from both her mother and from myself. She's also very sensitive to things that are pretty minor, in my opinion. She's very sassy and somewhat oppositional to the requests that are made of her about her chores, her homework, and other things that come up throughout the day. Her mom shares the same concerns and observations about her behavior. She's worried about this as well. Do you think that my daughter is behaving this way because of the divorce, or is it some weird hormonal thing because she's a tween? Either way, whatever advice you can offer so I can help my daughter get back to where she had been before all this, I would truly appreciate it. Signed, Distressed Daddy. Well, Distressed Daddy, to help with figuring all of this out, I have invited Dr. Laura Lewis on the show. Laura Lewis is a licensed psychologist who has worked in the field of psychology for over 10 years. Dr. Lewis has expertise in providing multicultural counseling and couples therapy. She specializes in assisting couples with increasing their intimacy and rebuilding trust after an infidelity by way of building effective communication skills so that both partners feel understood and validated. But Dr. Lewis will be joining us today to help Distressed Daddy figure out whether his daughter is experiencing negative consequences from the divorce occurring between her parents, or if Distressed Daddy's daughter is actually having some weird hormonal thing because she's a tween. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Lewis. Hey, Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for joining the Honeybee Podcast. I am super excited to be speaking with you on a topic that I know many of our listeners will appreciate. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. So excited to be here.
Absolutely. I am mindful that there are many listeners who's tuned into today's episode that were gravitated to this particular topic because they are experiencing this matter and or have experienced this matter. And the topic of today's conversation is, how do I know if the divorce occurring between my ex-spouse and I is affecting the functioning of our child, whether that be socially, emotionally, or behaviorally? So, of course, I had to get you in on this conversation because I would love to know more about the effects that divorce can have on a child's well-being and functioning. So, a moment ago, I had a chance to share a letter that I received from a concerned parent. So, I'm mindful that you did hear this, yeah?
Yes.
I'm curious to know, before we get started in identifying a few of the cues to give parents an idea as to whether or not their divorce is affecting their child globally, what sort of feedback can you offer Distressed Daddy?
Well, one is my experience comes from that point of view of working previously as an elementary school counselor before starting my practice at Atlanta Couple Therapy. And also my experience is also comes from being a child of a divorced family. And so I'll speak to the practical side of it, and I'll also speak to the side of it as a therapist. When there is a change in a child's behavior, like the child is always quiet, well mannered, even tempered, and then now it's been a shift. Typically, that's because something has happened. And so he has a reason to be alarmed because his daughter is normally not acting out. And so that's one sign to let you know that your divorce, your separation may be impacting your child when there's a behavior change or a personality change.
That's a valid point. So, noticing a change in temperament, a change in reaction, a change emotionally is a cue that because of this huge transition, right? Like in reading this letter, I'm getting the sense that this kid more than likely lived with both of their parents prior to their divorce. And now one of the parents have moved out of the home. So there's a change in routine, a change in structure, a change in the energy of the relationship. And so, Dr. Lewis, you make a valid point. After such a big change, and then the subsequent change in the child's energy and behavior, that could be the cue to distress daddy that this is more so about this young lady being sad, grief stricken, heartbroken about her parents' divorce, more so than it is about her being a tween.
That's right. That's right. It's more so than just everyday normal teenage changes. It's something deeper that's going on that needs to be addressed.
What advice do you give to parents in this number one observation that you've made in the change of personality and just being for the young lady? What advice do you have for either the father or the mother who's listening in this situation? How do they go about problem solving this with their child?
One is being mindful of not arguing in front of their child, because if they're arguing in front of their child, then their child may be in a position where they're seeing and hearing things that they just shouldn't have to deal with at this age, that they shouldn't even be aware of at this age, as far as the interdynamics of what's happening between them.
Absolutely. What is another way, item two, that parents could use as evidence that their divorce is affecting their child negatively?
The other thing is, if you are having conversations with your child, making your child choose between the two of you, choose how much they love the two of you. And sometimes this doesn't come out in a direct way, like, do you love me more? Do you love your mama more? But sometimes it comes out in a more indirect, subtle way. And so just being mindful of that, just being aware that the child being in a position where they have to constantly choose between who are they going to spend time with for this holiday, or who are they going to spend time with on Christmas or Thanksgiving, like that puts them in a very difficult position. And so making sure that they are working together as two co-parents can oftentimes help alleviate some of that strain from the child having to make all of these decisions.
That is a wonderful example. I want to dig a little bit deeper on that particular matter. Dr. Lewis, whether you are able to speak from this as a clinician or from personal experience, can you please identify what it is like through a child's lens when they are asked either subtly or very directly to make a choice as to which parent they spend the most time with? What effects does that have on the child when they have to make a choice of that nature?
Is extremely psychologically damaging, especially when you have a good relationship with both parents and you love both parents. And so being as a child having to choose between two parents that you love so much is psychologically traumatizing. And so a lot of times when we think of trauma, we may think of physical harm, physical abuse, hitting, kicking, those sort of things. But there are things that parents can do during the divorce proceedings that can really be traumatizing to a child. And so just being mindful of that, being mindful that this is harmful, this is psychologically harmful for my child to even speak negatively about the other parent, saying, well, your daddy ain't no good, or
Mhm.
So your mama was like just that, those sort of things can also have a very damaging impact.
Right. Because, because a child, my greatest hope more often than not, has a pleasant relationship, a loving, bonded, attached relationship with both parents, even having the situation of like your parents arguing and then one of them are leaving the home just to cool off or whatever, it's like there's a pull of allegiance. Who do I soothe? Who do I connect with? What do I do? Because you don't want to make the other parent feel like you don't care about them. Either parent, you don't want to make them feel like you don't care about them. It puts the child in a very precarious situation of who do I show my affection and care towards? So then having to choose, like, who do I live with? Who do I spend this holiday with? That I would imagine, nerding out for a little bit. Cortisol is a wonderful chemical to have because it helps us with managing stress, but too much of that can really cause devastating effects on our emotional reactions. It can cause devastating effects on our behavioral reactions. And even more, it can make our stomach hurt, make us anxious, make us depressed. It can really have some negative effects.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you so much for touching on that because that is such a great point. Is when cortisol is released and we get into this fight or flight mode for children, they cannot know what to do. Do I run away? Do I go to my room and hide? Like, what do I do when this chaos is happening? Not outside on the playground, but in the place that I call home. That's where the chaos is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And please share with our listeners what is item number 3 to be mindful of in the event the divorce is negatively affecting the child's functioning.
Item number 3 is when parents are starting to not talk about the child's issue, but talk about issues in their personal life. So getting upset with the other parent for having moved on, right? Because sometimes in divorce, one person is taking more of the leadership role in moving things forward with the divorce. And so one person may have gone through the mental separation process well before they actually filed the documentation. And now they're moving on with their life.
Great point.
Now, when they talk to that parent, instead of talking about, okay, how is Billy's development? How's Shanika doing in school? Instead of talking about that, now we're talking about, oh, yeah, I see your new girlfriend. I see your new boyfriend. So it becomes about the other parent having moved on with their life. This is a sign that this might be impacting the whole family dynamic because now when that person steps into the role as, say, the bonus parent or the stepmom, or it makes blending families much more difficult when there's this tension.
Right. Because what if, so it's kind of like through a child's lens, I would imagine like it's kind of weird seeing my mom or dad with a different person. And over time, I kind of see that this new person is sticking around. They have a warm personality towards me. I don't get the sense that they're trying to be a replacement parent for my other parent. And I like this person. And yet I hear mommy or daddy speaking negatively about this person that I kind of like, and they're probing me for questions. And
Yeah.
that what I would imagine causes a lot of stress for a kid.
You got it. You hit the head right on the nail. Oftentimes, what I see parents do, so say, for example, one parent is the primary custodial parent, and then the child goes to the other parent's house on the weekend. And then that child comes home, and then it's all these questions of, well, what did you do this weekend? What did y'all do? Oh, you spent time with her. And so then it's this tension, almost like the child has to choose between their mother, their father, and this other bonus parent. Like if I choose that I'm choosing you, daddy, and I love you, daddy, then it's not possible for me to have enough love for you and this other person. So then the child's put in this precarious situation where they have to choose between this person, this bonus parent, and the love of their biological parent.
So let me play devil's advocate, right? Because it could be coming from this energy too, or at least surface level, this energy. Well, Dr. Lewis, I only ask my daughter what's going on every single weekend when the bonus parent is there because I want to make sure that my daughter is safe. And so that's why I ask for every minute detail of their weekend, not because I feel a way about mommy moving on or daddy moving on. I just want to make sure my child is safe. So that's why I do it. So what is your response to that?
I would say that there definitely is some legitimacy to wanting to make sure that your child is safe on every level, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, like every level. Did you eat? Like just wanting to make sure that they're okay. But sometimes it can get a little bit too much detail. And then sometimes I see that parents are asking actually leading questions. It's not an open ended question, but it's, did she do your hair? Oh, that's how she did your hair? Or it's just those questions that have a certain just tint to it, a certain slant to the question.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Yes, please, for the listeners, define what you mean when it is a leading question, because we could be doing that and not even know that we're doing it. So please educate us on what is a leading question. And then if you can, offer what a more appropriate question would be.
Great question. So, what is a leading question? A leading question is a question that is slanted in a direction that's already in line with your opinion, right? So, say, for example, I really don't like this person. I don't like that my ex husband has moved on. And I definitely don't like that there's this other lady that's moving in on my territory and my child is starting to look to her as mom. I don't like it.
Right.
And so then when my child comes home, I'm asking, oh, that's what y'all did? Oh, well, how is that? It can be either in the exact wording of the question, or it could be in the body language or the tone around the question. So the tone could be just slanted in a way that is hostile towards the other bonus parent. Or the question can be like, oh, I can't believe that she did that. Is that what y'all did? So it's kind of slanted towards negative about that parent versus the alternative would be, how was your weekend?
Right. Open-ended question, allowing the child to identify how their weekend went. And then if there is something that the child says that then gives a red flag about safety being compromised or neglect or something thereafter, then asking more pointed, direct questions along those lines, not necessarily fishing for there to be something wrong because you feel some kind of way. But if you find that there's truly a safety concern or neglect issue, then being more directive or leading in finding out what happened over the weekend. Is that fair?
Yes, that is absolutely it. Because I mean, safety, that trumps everything. That is the number one, is that you want to make sure that your child is safe on every level. And then the other side of that is we also want to look at, how am I doing as the parent, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Like, how am I doing? And have a space where you can work through any unresolved issues that hasn't been addressed as of yet in the process of separating. Having that space, and that could be through counseling.
Right. So, Dr. Lewis, I'm curious to know, would you please identify those 3 items that parents can be mindful of that could tip them off to know that their divorce it has caused some negative, unpleasant reaction for their child before we get into the nugget of wisdom that you have on co-parenting? What are those 3 items to be mindful of?
So the first thing is, has there been any change in your child's temperament? Has there been any change in their mood, their personality, them acting out behavior wise? Like normally they don't have any problems at school. You don't get any calls home from school. But now you're starting to get calls home from school. That may be a sign that there's something that is deeper that's going on and your child is being impacted by your divorce. The other thing that I want for people to consider is, are you forcing your child into a position where they have to choose between either of you? They have to choose between which parent they love the most or which parent they are going to spend this holiday with. Like being mindful that that can be difficult for children to have to choose between parents. And then the last thing that we spoke about is that being mindful of the way that you are nurturing or not nurturing that relationship that the child has with the bonus parent, asking leading types of questions about the bonus parent.
Wonderful. Thank you for that review. So now we had the explanation in depth and then we had the quick and dirty. So now let's get into the wisdom that you can offer parents who have divorced one another and how they can be effective in co-parenting for the benefit of their child.
Some of the things that can be really helpful for the co-parenting relationship to go well is keeping in mind that the child comes first, right? So above any issues that I have with you, my number one issue is our child. And so as a result, I'm going to be focused on the well-being of our child. Maybe there are things that went wrong in how we ended, and I feel upset about that. But every time I see you, I don't need to rehearse that in my mind. I just need to focus in on keeping our child first. That's it.
That is very helpful, very wise information to offer the listeners. I think that that is something that's worth remembering to remember is keeping the child first and doing your best to get a bird's eye view over your emotions and having been emotionally compromised and the heartbreak that ensued after the dissolving of the relationship. Because, to be quite honest, we don't get married to plan on getting divorced, right? That's not how the story is supposed to go. And so then when that happens, in spite of that happening more often than we would want it to, it happens and we find a way to detach as much as we can emotionally so that way we can be of support lovingly and in a nurturing way to our child and not putting them in a situation to where they have to prove their loyalty to one parent over the other.
Such a great point that you just made. And the other things that I would add is just being mindful of arguing in front of your child, because sometimes the child can be put in a position where they have to be the mediator.
Mhm.
And it's like, instead of the parents having like healthy conversations, the child having to take back messages. And so sometimes it's helpful just to have a time that's set aside that on Fridays at 12 p.m., we talk about our parental issues and we have some conversations about what's coming up.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Aside from me being type A and structured, I love that because that gives the parent time, both parents time to identify descriptively and objectively what their concerns are, and hopefully will reduce the possibility of impulsive, reactive statements being made in a conversation. Like, we are here to discuss business, and I hate to be so sterile about it. And because I know emotions may be running high, it's, I think, maybe important to be that sterile about it and objective about it. Like, these are the issues. This is what we're discussing, whether that be over email or conversation in person. Here are our issues. Let's problem solve it. So that way things don't get messy.
That's right. So it doesn't get messy, so it doesn't turn left. Sometimes we have to deal with our emotions just in another space, right? Like, not with that actual parent, but through counseling in a whole nother space. Have a space that's dedicated for you to process your emotions. So then when the meeting comes on Friday at 12, we can just talk about this business.
Great, great, absolutely wonderful advice. Dr. Lewis, I really appreciate you for being on this episode. I have no doubt that the listeners have found this information to be beneficial because I certainly have. Now, before we end today's call, is there any last remarks that you want to make for our listeners? Any information that you want them to know about upcoming projects that you have going on that may be of benefit for them to know about? Whatever you have.
Sure. So I have a group. It's called Black Marriage Matters on Facebook. It's about 5,000 couples in there. And I go in and I do different videos to train and educate couples on things that they can do to enhance their relationship. And so that's one way to connect with me. Also, my website is Atlanta Couple Therapy. I wrote a book. It's called Marital Peace. And in that book, I have one chapter that's all about blended families. Because myself, I come from a blended family. I know that there were some struggles that came up in my own personal life that I now have been able to help couples who have made the decision that we are ending, but we don't want this to negatively impact our children. And so that's a resource you can also find on Amazon.
That is wonderful. That is all very wonderful things. I'm happy that people will be able to learn more about you, your practice, and benefit from your expertise personally and professionally. Dr. Lewis, I wish for you to have an absolutely wonderful day, and I hope that you take good care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I Really enjoyed having Dr. Lewis on the show. I feel like she really provided some awesome information for our listeners. I learned a lot. I really hope that Distressed Daddy found her feedback to be valuable and that he, if he is not already, will implement some of her ideas so that way things can be more harmonious between his daughter and both of her parents. So, be sure to check out the show notes so you can find out where Dr. Lewis is on social media, more on her website, and the speaking events that she has going on. While you are on the internet, why don't you go to myhoneybeetherapy.com? That's my website. Feel free to check out what I have going on. I think that is important. I would love for you to send me a message on an episode idea that you have, any feedback on the podcast, so long as it is respectful and constructive. Send it to me. I love to hear from you. In closing, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and until next time, peace.